and laugh and cry and enjoy the magical ride of this fairy tale.
Alison Owen, my colleague, read the book first and said it was one of those things. It's sort of like finding a gem when you sort of came running into the office going, "My God, have you read Nigel's new book? It's amazing." And then we all read it and just absolutely adored it. It's just such an enjoyable read that you did feel like it would, you know, be crazy not to bring it to the big screen, really. I think also the idea of everyone adores food. And when somebody, it's quite rare you read writing that actually makes you want to do something or be somebody. And I think what Nigel's book does, it really kind of makes you, firstly want to eat, but also really triggers memories back of what food means for you as well. And I think everybody in the world loves food and everybody in the world has memories, so it kind of felt like a perfect thing to bring to the big screen. It was very much sort of part of the package, i.e., you know, we wanted to really buy the book, but it was very much who would really write this. It kind of came in with Nigel giving us the permission to actually buy the book from him and adapt it. And Lee Hall is Lee Hall. I mean, he's extraordinary. Everyone would love to work with him as much as you could, really. And it was one of those nice things that actually Lee was incredibly busy, and I think Alison called him and said, "Would you read this book? You're going to love it." And I think didn't know anything about it particularly, but said, "I'm really busy, you know, Alison, but, you know, send it to me." And then read it and called Alison straight away and was like, "Oh my God, I really have to do this." Somehow cramming it in between all the other screenplays he had to do. This definitely is Nigel's story, but it is also Nigel's perspective on the story. It's a sort of a semi-unreliable narrator. And I think visually, you know, you can do such exciting things with that. And I think SJ just thoroughly enjoyed that and completely and utterly embraced it. And enjoyed having the meringue pies, you know, 3 times bigger than they really should be. So I think she's without a doubt the perfect person for the job. I think also with SJ, she created Mistresses, which is extraordinary and brilliant, but a lot of the US stuff is fantastic, incredibly extravagant and beautifully visual, but I really wanted her to do something also that was very original to her, and I think Toast really allowed her to kind of really give a real SJ-ism to a piece. We took the decision to have obviously 2 boys, little boy and an older boy. There was at one point a debate whether we could have a boy to play in both parts, but we just didn't really feel like it was just so hard to do. So it was a sort of a bit of a chicken and egg, because you sort of needed to know who your older boy was to match the younger boy, but at the same time you need to find the younger boy. So what we did is we just basically we called all the agencies, got all the kids in that are sort of on the books, and then decided, and that was the plan, and then decided to sort of break that and make it wider. And then the brilliant Rachel Freck sort of did a trawl all around London, different youth groups, and then went up to Wolverhampton and Birmingham, again to all their youth groups, and then went to Nottingham, where we found little Oscar Kennedy. All our departments actually met with Nigel at different points, especially Tom Burton, our production designer, also, and went through, you know, all his photo albums of the time. I was incredibly conscious. The one thing I didn't want to do is I wanted to make sure the 60s and the 70s can sometimes look quite comical on screen, and especially when you're moving through eras as well. And also not to get so stuck in it, you know. people don't always wear the same things in the 60s. People do wear things from the 40s and the 50s, you know, the different places. And of course, we're also talking about Birmingham, which wasn't maybe London, which was slightly more probably ahead of the times at the time, you know. And so it's sort of trying to get that balance where we're not too comical, where you're definitely sucked into a world, but you're sort of not being hit over the head by this is this period and this is what it should be like. It's hard because you are sort of in two sets of world, because you jump in age, and he in his life he did live in two different places, so it was creating two homes that represented him and his family in whichever contortion that family was at that time. So we did a bit of both really, in that the cottage was all completely location, and that really had to be that, because I think you had to find a house that felt isolated. You had to really feel like he was in the middle of nowhere. And I think for however much you can try and build in a studio, I just don't think you can quite encapsulate that feeling. And that kind of country home, that when a country home has existed for hundreds of years, where it evolves through different families. And definitely that's what Nigel's country home ended up being and was like. So I think we felt it was important to find it. Nigel's home, we did find and we did build a couple of the interiors. For logistical reasons and again creative reasons. He was brought up in Wolverhampton, so we ended up actually filming in Birmingham for his house, but I think it kind of felt quite appropriate. And logistically, just in regards to shooting the amount of stuff we did in his kitchen and his home, we felt it was better to build that, because then we can kind of, it just gives us your scope where you can film, you can float walls and things. You can kind of help with the kind of magic actually. I think the most pleasure we get from this film is how happy Nigel is about it. You know, we wanted to make it because we wanted to make it, of course, but really the last thing we'd want to do is make something that Nigel wasn't happy with. And definitely the scenes that he came for on set were the most sort of trying emotional scenes, I'd say. Him talking to his mother about her dying, when he, as a boy, didn't realise she was dying, and her sort of trying to tell him, you know, and however you could ever tell a 9-year-old child, I've got no idea. So yeah, there was definitely quite a heavy day, and the whole crew were crying. Literally, it was an incredibly emotional scene anyway. I think even if Nigel wasn't there, the whole crew would be crying. But I think with Nigel there, it just kind of created a real poignancy that what we are doing is actually based on a real person and it's really happened to them.
This extraordinary thing about putting your life down on paper in black and white. It's a bit like keeping a food diary and writing down what you've eaten, and you think, oh, did I eat all that? It's exactly the same thing. Did I experience that? I didn't know it was going to be therapeutic. I was just telling the story of my life as a little boy. It was only when I read it back, when it was a full manuscript, that I started to realise that the reason I behaved in a certain way now is because of what happened then. Things fell into place. Very sort of dark patches in my life were a bit clearer. And also the people, and how and why they reacted in a certain way. It ended up being therapeutic, a totally cathartic thing, but I certainly didn't ever think it would be. It just ended up like that. I wasn't hesitant at all about the idea of Toast coming to the screen. In fact, the minute it was suggested, I thought, why didn't I think of it? because it hadn't occurred to me when I was writing it that it would ever become a film. The minute somebody said this will make a film, I thought, well, of course it will. And I knew it was in the right hands. I think the minute you meet people and they're going to touch a project of yours, you know straight away whether it's right or wrong. And I was comfortable with this and very excited about it. I suppose the difference is that when you see something on screen, it suddenly becomes so much more illuminated, and it's bigger. It's events that were perhaps quite insignificant, and details that were insignificant when you wrote them down suddenly become very important when you see them. And I hadn't expected really to get such a buzz out of the whole thing, but I really did. I enjoyed it. I loved watching the whole thing become a film. When I heard that Lee was doing the script, I mean, I was thrilled, completely thrilled. But then there is that moment of when you are unsure and you really don't know how it's going to be. So until I actually saw it, I had no idea of how I was going to feel about it. But I was very pleased and very happy. And I think that what Lee did, which was, I think, so clever, was he just got the Nigels right. I mean, because it's difficult having to write for a very young Nigel, 9, 10 years old, and then a 16, 17-year-old Nigel. In a way, they were almost two people, and he got them both. So I was very pleased, just very happy with that. What I suppose has surprised me and delighted me is how accurate some of the characters are. There were moments when I was watching the film and thinking, oh my God, that's exactly how it was, and that's exactly how that person was, and how I'd written it. And I wasn't expecting to do that. I thought it would feel quite foreign and really quite different. But there were so many points of recognition right the way through it, and not just from the nostalgic, oh yes, I remember that packet or that tin can. It was much, much more than that. It was the characters, and it was the way that they bounced off one another, and the whole thing between my friend Worrell and myself. It was just like being in the sweet shop with Worrell again. When I was having a chat with Freddie in the makeup room, I was just thumbing through the book of the photographs, how everybody had been made up so far. And I turned a page, and there was just this chill, just went straight down my spine. I was looking at my father's neck, his haircut. It was just like I was sort of looking at the back of my dad. And I turned the page, and it was Ken. Every movement, every detail, every word is my dad. And I found it, it was difficult, because I had very difficult times with my dad, and I haven't totally got good memories of him. But I knew that the character was in perfect hands. And, you know, sorry Ken, but she's just like my dad. I gave Mrs. Potter quite a tough time in the book, because she gave me a tough time. And the first meeting I had with Helena, she said something that kind of really took me by surprise, was what about the tender moments? You know, it can't have all been bad. And it did slightly hit me like a brick, really, because of course there were tender moments. She taught me how to tie up my football boots. She taught me how to tie a tie. She taught me how to knit. I mean, those are quite intimate moments. And we did laugh about things as well. I used to laugh at my dad sometimes. I'd forgotten about these. They didn't feature in the book, and they certainly didn't feature in my memory of Mrs. Potter. It was only when Helena said, "Oh, come on, what about the other side?" that I began to think about that and began to explore that side of things. When I met him, I was very aware there was a very quiet confidence in Oscar, which there wasn't in Nigel. But there is a slight steeliness as well, which I've got, or I had, at that point. Everything seemed to fall into place. I recognised little bits about him. I think he's tougher than I was. He's quite strong and he's quite determined. Freddie is me. I mean, he's very definitely Nigel. There's no two ways about it. He's got that absolute core of steel in him. You know that whatever happens, he's going to win. I knew I was going to get out of that situation, whatever. And you know it right from the word go. But because Freddie plays it in a very cool way, in a very controlled way, he's not as vulnerable as young Nigel. He has definitely grown up. It's almost like the second half of the film. You do get quite a different Nigel, but that's exactly how it was. I was no longer that little boy who'd lost his mum. I was a young lad in a situation that I didn't want to be in. I was surrounded by people I didn't want to be with, and I felt very hard done to. And I got to get out of it. And Freddie got that straight away. I think Catherine knew exactly the food of that period. Although she's younger than me, she knew straight away what a lemon meringue pie would look like when it was baked in the 60s, the certain pie dish you'd use, the great pile of meringue on top that you probably wouldn't do nowadays. She got it straight away. And every bit of food that came out of her kitchen, I recognised totally as just being right. And I think partly that's research. I mean, she'd done a lot of research, but I think also she just knew what food from that era was like. It was principally home cooking, most of it. And it wasn't always mine. Some of it was my stepmother's. So she had a bit of license there. Anyway, it wasn't all my cooking. But no, she got it absolutely spot on without much help from me. I just happened to magically choose the most emotional scenes. The first one was very, very difficult because it was when Oscar and Mum are dancing, and little Nigel knows that Mum is very ill, but it's the first time he actually asks her. And there is a moment when he says, "But you will still be around for Christmas." And of course, Mum knew she wasn't going to be. That was, it was like tissues for Nigel, absolutely, totally broke down with that. And as I was sobbing into my tissues, I turned around, I don't know, I suppose out of embarrassment, and I wasn't the only one in the room who was crying. There were several people who were in floods of tears as well. So I knew we got something right. I was very amused by the suggestion that I should have even the tiniest role in Toast. What I didn't realise was actually how difficult it was going to be, even for my split-second appearance, partly because we had a choice of spectacles, and the ones that we all liked I couldn't see through. I couldn't see 2 feet in front of me, and I had to march through a door, push it aside, and storm in charge of this kitchen, all of which I did blind as a bat. I couldn't see anything. And of course, Freddie, Freddie's a proper grown-up actor, and I'm there thinking he must think I'm just getting this so wrong. But I enjoyed it. My little, 2 seconds on screen, I had a good time. I'm not sure I'll do it again, and I won't be changing my career. And there's so many ways you could have done this film. It could have been very grey and gritty, which is not how I wrote the book. I didn't think of it as being a very grey and gritty thing. It could have been done as a comedy, because the book is actually quite funny in parts. Or it could have just been a sob fest. There's so many different ways you can have done it. The approach that was taken, this magical, almost fairy tale view of it, came as actually a bit of a surprise. But when I look back at the book afterwards, it was almost written, I hadn't noticed that I had written it almost as a child's story. It was that magical aspect of it that I found so delightful, because I hadn't thought of it, and I hadn't pictured it ever being like that. So there is a certain dreamlike quality to the finished film that I love, but it came as a surprise, and I wasn't expecting it, and I'm very, very pleased that we took that route.
I suppose some of my most favourite films have been things about coming of age stories about especially young kids, young boys, and there was something very familiar about Nigel's story about growing up in the north, and growing up in an unprepossessing place, and I'm feeling a bit different, and I'd written Billy Elliot, which is obviously very similar to that scenario, and some radio plays that addressed that, and so I felt very at home with that story, and I'm very at home with all some of the weird tinned foods that Nigel was forced to eat. I remember them all from my childhood. I suppose everybody of my age probably does, and that's what's quite spectacular about the book and the film. It's a story about food, but it's also a story about bad food as well. I only had one main meeting with Nigel, which is I invited him to my house for lunch, and then panicked because I thought, well, how on earth can I cook for Nigel? I was so embarrassed. So I went around town to the sort of the finest delicatessens, and I had a table absolutely groaning with enough to feed about 40 people. And I think he came in and sort of went a bit pale at the thought, and he had a very modest slice of pork pie. He really left me alone. I think he understood, I hope, that he could trust me with the story, and I loved him. I got along really well with him, but his greatest gift was to trust me and just let me beaver away. It seemed to me that the heart of the story was this period where he lost his mum, and then his dad remarries, and all of the emotional things that happened and subsequently informed everything sort of happened in this period of it's probably 5 or 6 years, really. And so I thought that it told the larger story that Toast tells in the book in a smaller way. Everything was sort of packed in there. So I really focused on that. And also there was the problem that I think has been solved beautifully in the film of how many people can be Nigel, and we have two. And I think it works really well. And it seemed to be the younger Nigel who he identifies with his mum, and then the older Nigel who's sort of forced to deal with the consequences of her death. I think that Helena managed to find the contradictions and some of the strivings and some of the failings, which absolutely have a terrible impact on Nigel, but are very interesting to watch as she tries and fails to negotiate this relationship, which ultimately is a tragedy for her as much as it is for Nigel. In fact, Nigel's the one who gets out. It's almost a story that you couldn't make up, but it's extraordinary that's happened to somebody who has overcome all of the things that Nigel had to go through when he was a kid, the bereavement, and then going into this crazy situation with, you know, a woman who he hates and was so awful to him. So I do think we get a lot for free, because we know somehow, somewhere when we're watching the story, that this kid is going to get out and succeed and overcome this this sort of terrible situation. And so as you're watching it, you've always got that in the back of your mind. But it is an extraordinary story, I think, that, you know, and the fact that it's real and somebody's real life is pretty amazing.
I've always been intrigued by Nigel, and I love his cookbook. So from a sort of, I just thought, oh, I've always been drawn to him. He's just seems such a humane and just, and also Toast itself. You read the book, and it's a great way of just getting catapulted back to your own childhood. Well, I was the child of the 70s, so all his foods and all these things, it's just been fantastic. So I'm very, I was really grateful to her, and also getting inside of a boy's mind. You know, so it was helpful for me to get in touch in a way with my own son, and how much a child is so reliant on food, you know, and tastes and smells, and you know, so, and it's so touching too. So I loved the book, and then I met SJ, and the worrying thing though was that Mrs. Potter could be a caricature, and then it was sort of, so she's got to be humanised, otherwise no one's going to care. And of course, from a child's point of view, he puts, because it was told from Nigel's point of view, life is unfair, you know, and he probably did hate. He definitely hated Mrs. Potter, but you don't necessarily get a full